Welcome to San Diego Comic-Con at Home and the new Kids Comics from Eisner Award Publishers panel. This great panel is sponsored by the Children's Book Council Graphic Novel Committee and features Jerry Craft, creator of Class Act and the upcoming New Kid, and Erin Hicks, creator of 1 Year at Ellsmere, who join exciting comic artists Robin Ha, creator of Almost American Girl, Derrick Brooks, illustrator of Brightfamily, and Jonathan Hill, creator of Odessa, in a discussion about new kids' graphic novels, which is moderated by me, Candace Wing-Yi-Mack. So first, I want to introduce our awesome panelists. So first, Derrick Brooks. Him is a cartoonist from Richmond, Virginia, where apparently there's really good food, working in comics, literary publishing, and animation. Derrick loves to create adventure fantasy, soft sci-fi, and slice-of-life stories about BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. He is currently illustrating the book series Brightfamily and in production of his first graphic novel, Grip Up, coming in 2022. And here are some examples of his awesome work. Next up, we have Jerry Craft. His is a New York Times bestselling author and illustrator. His book, New Kid, is the winner of the 2020 John Newbery Medal for the most outstanding contribution to children's literature. It is the first graphic novel in the Newbery's nearly 100-year history to receive the award. Craft is only the 5th African-American author to land the coveted prize. New Kid was also awarded the Coretta Scott King Award for an outstanding work by an African-American writer. Craft is the second person to have simultaneously won both awards in the same year. Craft was born in Harlem and grew up in the Washington Heights section of New York City, which he references in New Kid. He is a graduate of the Fieldston School and received his Bachelor's of Fine Arts from the School of Visual Arts. He resides in Connecticut with his 2 sons and 2 beagles. And here are some examples of art from New Kid. And next up, we have Robin Ha, she, her, who is a Korean-American cartoonist and illustrator based in Washington, D.C. She's the author of the New York Times bestselling comic cookbook, Cook Korean, a comic book with recipes. Her work has been published in independent comics anthologies, including Secret Identities and The Strumpet, as well as in the pages of Marvel Comics and Heavy Metal magazine. Her graphic novel memoir, Almost American Girl, talks about immigrating from Seoul, Korea to Huntsville, Alabama as a teenager in the mid-1990s. And here are some illustrations from Almost American Girl. Next, Erin Hicks, she, her, is a Canadian writer and artist. She worked in the animation industry for several years before transitioning into writing and drawing comics full-time in 2008. She started making comics for fun and putting them on the web when she was in college. Her first published work was Zombies Calling in 2007. Since then, she has published a number of other graphic novels, including Brain Camp, Friends with Boys, Nothing Can Possibly Go Wrong, The Adventures of Superhero Girl, The Nameless City and Pumpkinheads. Faith won an Eisner Award in 2014 for The Adventures of Superhero Girl, and in 2019, her debut young adult prose novel, Comics Will Break Your Heart, was published by Roaring Brook Press. And here are some scenes from, from 1 Year in Ellsmere.
I also won a second Eisner Award last year.
Woo! For the Nameless City!
Nameless City book. Sorry, I should have made sure you got an updated bio. More Eisner.
Woo! And last but certainly not least, Jonathan Hill. His is an Ignatz-nominated cartoonist, illustrator, and educator living in Portland, Oregon. His first 2 graphic novels, Americus and Wild Weather, Storms, Meteorology, and Climate, were published by First Second, and his 3rd book, Odessa, will be published in November of 2020, and he has another forthcoming book, True Tales of a 7th Grade Lizard Boy, in 2022. Jonathan teaches comics in the illustration department at the Pacific Northwest College of Art, currently serves on the board of directors of literary arts, and chairs the Youth Programs Advisory Council. Woo! It's very different not having an audience, a face-to-face audience. And here are some examples of Jonathan Hill's work. And as for me, I'm Candace Wingy Mack, and my pronouns are she, her. I manage system-wide team services, programs, and collections at the Los Angeles Public Library, the third largest library system in the United States. And I'm the incoming president of the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. As a lifelong Southern Californian, I've attended San Diego Comic-Con since I was a teenager myself and had the great honor of serving on the 2018 Will Eisner Comic Industry Awards jury. And I also served on the 2019 We Need Diverse Books Walter Dean Myers Award jury, and am a past president of the Young Adult Library Services Association. And as you can see on Twitter, I post about food, music, libraries, YA lit, social justice, and comics as @tinylibrarian. But enough about that. Let's get started with our super awesome creators. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see everyone better. Yay! And start going into our discussion. So let's start with Derrick. Could you please describe your latest or upcoming project?
Currently just working on the fourth book in the Brightfamily series right now. I'm just starting to do the sketches and kind of simultaneously trying to work on my own graphic novel that you spoke about before. Can y'all hear that ping? I don't know if that's me or not. I apologize. But yes, I'm working on both of those simultaneously. Grip Up should be finished by next year, and then it should be out the year after that. And Brightfamily, we're finishing the first run of it in September. That'll be the fifth book, and then there are plans to do another round of maybe 5 or 6 more issues coming next year.
Awesome, thank you, Derrick. Jerry, could you share a little bit about something that I heard you just turned in?
Yes. So I just finished Class Act, which is the companion book to New Kid. So it will follow one of the other characters named Drew, who was one of Jordan Banks' best friends in New Kid. And it will be their 8th grade year. And, you know, same characters that hopefully you loved. They'll be back. And it will be out October 6th of this year. So just in a few mere months, it will be on the stands.
Awesome, thank you, Jerry. Next up, how about Robin?
Hi, thanks for inviting me. This is very exciting. So my latest book is Almost American Girl. It's a graphic novel memoir about myself as a 14-year-old moving from Seoul, Korea to Huntsville, Alabama. So my mom, she was a single mother. I grew up in Korea with her, and we went on a vacation every summer to Summer Exotic. And one day she's like, "We're going to Alabama for vacation." And when we got there, she got married, and we never went back to Korea. So this book is about how I, struggled a lot, basically, in Alabama, trying to learn the new language and make new friends. And also, I had this unexpected addition of step family in my life, so I had to get along with them. So, yeah. And right now I'm working on another book with the same publisher, Balder and Bray. It's gonna be a YA fiction, and I am just finishing up the writing stage right now. I haven't really started drawing yet, but it's basically a fantasy set in 16th century in Korea. So there's gonna be some costume and magic and fighting and lots of cool stuff. So I'm very excited to draw it now.
That sounds amazing. Well, everyone's work sounds amazing. How about Faith?
Let me just unmute myself. So Robin, your next book sounds amazing. I love fantasy. So my next book coming out is called 1 Year at Ellsmere, and it's about these two girls at a fancy boarding school. One is a scholarship student who's come into this like very rich and snooty environment, and she makes a friend, and she also makes an enemy. So it's about, you know, friendships between very young women, and then also rivalries and enemy ships, I guess, between young women as well. And because it's written and drawn by me, and because I love fantasy and weird stuff, there's also like some supernatural shenanigans going on. When You're at Ellesmere is actually 10 years ago that was originally published by a tiny indie publisher in California that I don't think is around anymore. And this new version, all of the artwork has been redone. It's now in color. Originally it was published in black and white, and the story is slightly different as well. So it's like, I guess, the HD remaster of the old graphic novel. So I'm very excited for people, you know, for this book to have new readers. It's still, you know, I have a very fond place for it in my heart. I'm also writing and drawing a brand new original graphic novel that I'm working on right now. And that one is about girls and horses. It has not been announced yet, but it's a little bit based on my experiences being a horse girl growing up, and riding horses and relationships that I had with girls at the stables that I rode in. And that one does not have a title yet, unfortunately. We're still struggling to find a title. That's the worst part, I find, of making a comic, is finding a title for it.
Thank you, Faith. And last but certainly not least, Jonathan.
All right. Hello. Thank you for having me. So I just finished in March, like right as COVID was hitting, I finished Odessa, which is about 3 Vietnamese American siblings. It takes place 8 years after sort of the great earthquake that we're all waiting for here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm sure Faith reads about that all the time too, like us here in Portland. And so it sort of has destroyed the West Coast. And these siblings, the main character Virginia, her mother left shortly after the earthquakes happened, and they just kind of assumed she was dead. And so for her 16th birthday, she gets a package from her mother that lets her know that she's alive. And she decides to go looking for her, and her siblings sort of come along with her. And so that's what Odessa is about. And I, you know, before we were talking, Jerry was talking about how he's had all this time to work because we can't go anywhere, we can't do anything. So I've kind of been in that. It was nice to kind of have that work, but I once I finished that, I started my next book, which will be for Candlewick, or their imprint Walker. And it was really hard to shift to writing. I don't know if anybody else is having that problem, but so I'm writing my next book. It's True Tales of a 7th Grade Lizard Boy. I think they said it'd be out in 2022, but for every good day of work I have 2 days where I can't even like put pants on. So like, it's been really hard lately. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see what gets pushed back, and just because of everything. But again, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Sure. I will try to avoid asking the question of whether or not anyone is wearing pants, even though that's really tempting. The next question is, how and why did you choose the particular focus of your work? And I thought I would start with Jonathan with this question.
So I guess it started, so way back in 2011, my first book came out, and I did it with my friend MK Reed, and like, she already had a project lined up, and I felt like that put a lot of pressure on me to be like, well, what am I going to do next? And every idea I came up with just didn't have something. It like was like in my head, I was like, oh, that's a clever idea for a book, but you know, you need to have like a heart to it. And it was missing that. And I mean, this is going to sound kind of weird, or I don't know, horrible, but my sister-in-law was getting divorced at the time. And so to see what her kids were going through made me remember sort of what I was going through. And when my parents got divorced, and that sort of connection of the siblings. And so like, I think I was just like, oh yeah, like when your parents are your world, and then that world gets destroyed. Not a so subtle metaphor when their world is destroyed. You know, your siblings, you're stuck with them, you love them, you play with them, you fight with them, but you know, they're there for you. And I think it wasn't until I got older, I was like, I mean, essentially this book is just a love letter to my brothers and how much they meant to me, and how like I see their fingerprints everywhere in my life right now.
Thanks, Jonathan. How about Jerry next?
So, you know, it's kind of funny that with all the books that I have done, where it's like, you know, kids going into space and doing this and all this like wildly creative stuff in different lands, that the one that really hit for me was the one that's based on my life and my two sons' lives. So I was born in Harlem. I grew up in Washington Heights, just like the main character in New Kid, Jordan Banks. I was always the smallest kid and the youngest kid in my class, much like Jordan Banks. So I used a lot of that. And I went to primarily African-American schools that were very small, 25 kids in the class, of which maybe 22 were African-American. And I wanted to go to art school, and my parents did not want me to go to art school because they thought it was a fad, and they wanted me to be able to have a real job and not be a starving artist, as was a very popular term back then. So they sent me to this school called Fieldston in Riverdale, not really thinking that it would be difficult because it was a great opportunity. And strangely enough, when I got married and had two sons of my own, we ended up doing the same thing to our kids. So I got to, you know, they went to a fancy school here in Connecticut. And so I got to live New Kid myself as a kid who also, you know, grew up in a Black neighborhood. So each day going back and forth from one world to the other and having to be like a chameleon. And then seeing it for 13 years as a dad raising two kids. But at least I, having been through it, I was able to kind of warn them that, all right, now, you know, when first day they talk about Black History Month, don't be shocked if everyone in the class turns and stares at you, you know. And then I remember my youngest came home, fourth grade, said, yep, it happened. You know, they talked about Black History Month and they all turned and stared at me. But so we were really able to ground them a lot more than I think I was grounded. And then in the, you know, like I said, that the next book, Class Act, will be following up on that book. So it has been interesting, but it's been a great ride.
Thanks, Jerry. How about Derrick next?
So I realized that I did not really explain what the books that I'm working on are even about. Brightfamily is about a pair of siblings that basically go on this dimension hopping adventure in search of their parents. It's written by Matthew Cody. And then Grip Up is basically about intergalactic thumb wrestling. It's about two cousins. It's super loosely based on me and my cousin growing up, who was pretty much my best friend. We weren't like obsessed with thumb wrestling. It's just kind of the avenue I decided to use to kind of discuss our relationship and the brotherly love that we just ended up sharing. And we kind of got a little separated by the time middle school came around. And so the story kind of delves into that some, where they're at the end of their 5th grade year and they're going to be going to different schools ultimately. So basically all of my stories are just, I try to just revolve around slice of life stuff with a little bit of adventure and like fantasy and stuff spliced in, you know, for Black kids, basically, to be frank. I just personally want to see a wider range of stories about us. And I think they're all necessary. I think like it's fun to just, you know, see yourself in those stories. And I want children to see themselves in the stories that I tell. And that's basically been my main goal thus far. I still feel like I'm super early in the game. I've only been doing comics professionally for like a year. So yeah, and that's just where I'm headed at. And I just want to incorporate all the things that I like in, like, you know, my every day-to-day life and what I grew up with, and seeing how I can just like kind of shape those and mold those into like weird, kind of magical and fantastical stuff. So that is it.
Thanks, Derrick. I'm so excited by both the intergalactic thumb wrestling and Lizard Boys, and also hearing more about Drew. And then, of course, Robin, how about you? How and why did you choose a particular focus of your current work and your upcoming one?
Oh, okay. So, you know, I grew up reading comics in Korea, and like I always thought about, you know, myself as an artist only. I never really thought about like writing for my own comics for some reason. So when I, you know, graduated from college and I was looking for a gig, like I did a few, you know, work for hire stuff as an artist who drew other people's stories. And those were fun, but it was never really satisfying. I felt like I was spending a lot of time and energy making these stories come alive as a comic book, but like I didn't really have that much connection. So I felt like I need to come up with a story that I would be really happy to draw, not just as like a hired artist. So I looked into my own life and like kind of tried to come up with a story that is worth basically my time to draw. And this time period when I was 14, it really changed my life completely. Like, you know, it was completely unexpected, and it was probably the most hardest time of my life. And somehow, like, I got through with it, and now I'm a totally different person. I speak different language, and I have a completely different lifestyle. So it just seemed like a really good subject for me to really dive into, not just for the sake of making a comic book, but just even for myself. You know, I wanted to know how I was able to get through it. And I also realized in American comics, there aren't that many stories about immigrant kids in my generation. So I definitely thought that there was a place for a story like mine that needs to be filled. So, you know, everything just kind of made sense for me to really dive into that particular time period of my life.
Thanks, Robin. And Faith, how about you?
I mean, my entire career has basically been writing and drawing the stories that I really wanted to read as a kid and as a teenager. I remember I'm Canadian, so I grew up reading like Tintin and Asterix comics. Those were very formative for me. And then when I was older, I was so in love with comics. I was in love with the art form, and I was desperate to read them. But I would go to I grew up in this very small town, and I would go to the local comic store, and it would all be like this wall of superhero comics where women were portrayed in a way that was not particularly pleasant for, you know, a teen or preteen girl to to look upon. So like that has really been the focus of my career. It's like I want to write and draw stories that specifically focus on girls and women, and tell the kinds of stories that I was just so desperate to read when I was a kid. The comic book industry, I mean, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's really changed, you know, and it feels like there's so many comics for girls and women, and so many comics made by girls and women right now, which is really wonderful. But man, it was just a wasteland when I was a kid. And, you know, Ellsmere, which I wrote and drew over 10 years ago, it was, you know, having it come out it was originally published in like 2008. And I remember like, that was also the year that DC Comics tried to do like an imprint of comics for girls, and it failed miserably. And I just remember being told repeatedly by, industry leaders that it's like, oh, girls only read manga. There's no comics for, no girls are not going to read North American comics. And I mean, boy, have those people been proven wrong. So yeah, it's really cool and really exciting to have Ellsmere reprinted now to an industry and readership that is much more open-hearted, I guess, towards these kinds of stories. But yeah, and that's the same thing I was thinking about when I'm in the midst of writing and drawing my Untitled Girls and Horses story. It's like, I was a horse girl and I loved comics, and the idea of a comic about girls and horses was just like, oh my gosh, that would have been so wonderful and so spectacular for me as like an 11 or 12-year-old. So it's just so exciting to get to actually tell those stories from my point of view. It's really wonderful.
Thanks, Faith. I remember when that DC Minx line came out, because I bought them all, both personally and for the library, because I was so excited as a person who reads comics and manga and enjoys anything animated or drawn, really. So
like my graphic novel Friends with Boys, which was published by First Second Books in 2012, that was originally a pitch for the Minx line. Like the woman that headed that line, she actually approached me and asked for pitches, and Friends with Boys was the one that we developed together. So even though that line did fail and didn't leave any lasting impact on the industry, it's like I feel like I kind of really got something out of it, because Friends with Boys was, even though it was my 4th published book, it was the first book that I had that really like broke out, and the libraries especially in particular really supported.
Yeah, and that's great, because my next question is actually, have you noticed any changes in comics for kids since you started your comics journey? And this time we wanted to start with Derrick.
Like I said, I'm early in the game, so I'm not even sure how much different it has been. I mean, I've obviously seen like a larger kind of influx, I guess, of just creators of color and their stories being told, which obviously I'm on board for and think is great. I can say what I'm looking more for is just people talking more about like their identity, and that being a larger topic of discussion, and just like voices that have been marginalized being able to speak more and being able to create more and be behind the scenes and like all across the board. And I feel like maybe that had been lacking a bit. And I'm just looking for it to be a long-term thing and not just something that's happening at this moment. And I think, everybody's kind of looking for that too, hopefully. Yeah.
Thanks, Derrick. Yeah, I have to say that, well, in general, I was just really honored to be helping with this panel, but I was also just super, super excited in general about the diversity on this panel, to be quite frank, because that doesn't always happen. So I'm glad that there's been efforts by a lot of folks to increase that. And Jonathan, how about you?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, what I always tell folks is, I graduated school in like 2003. I started working on my first book in like 2007 or so. And, I remember when I first came out, I think we all wanted to be like the next great American cartoonist or something, like whatever that meant, but so many of us have gone into children's publishing. I think there's an economic reality of that, but I also think it's just like, kind of like Derrick said, there's folks that are bringing different voices, and like Faith said, like there's so many different voices in the opportunity of children's publishing, as opposed to, it's funny because when people say mainstream comics, like those aren't even mainstream comics anymore, right? Like what's a sliver of the fraction that are actually selling, DC or Marvel, that's actually selling in the comics market? No, it's For Second, Scholastic, random, like all these. So, I guess, so I don't know if that really answered the question, but I think similar to what I think we've heard a lot of people say is like, just wanting to have representation. And I think what's interesting, like an interesting anecdote is, so the ARC went out for Odessa, and I I made a mistake and I read some of the reviews. I feel like you should never review. I tell everybody not to do that, and then I do it, and then I'm like, why did I do that? But there was a woman who had criticized that the characters were Asian American, and that they didn't seem like it didn't reference their culture at all or anything like that. And I don't know if it was something like I feel like I did a comic for The Believer about I have a white sounding name, and so I've actually had it at conventions or even just like in school or things like that, where someone will meet me and they're like, oh, like they didn't realize I was Asian American. And it's just this interesting thing that I think this woman saw my name and then read the book and thought that I was just trying to cash in on that like diversity card or whatever. But I think a big part of it is that like just having characters that were Vietnamese American and not having that have to be part of their story or their struggle. So again, like, because when I was growing up, I didn't have that. If there was anybody that was a character, it was like Vietnamese New Year, here's a book tying into that, or like their family owns a pho restaurant. And so like, and so it was just one of those things where just like, yes, like I just wanted to have characters that, again, like we've all said, I would want someone who's 10 or 11 who's Asian American can pick up a book and see that they can be the hero. But also it helps normalize, I think, that heroes don't have to be of the dominant culture. And then that helps normalize it for kids reading those books anyway, and I don't know. So that was sort of, I think that's the biggest change. Again, it's just sort of repeating what we've said, but that hoping that this is a long-term thing and not just like a sort of in the moment,
Thank you, Jonathan. As someone who also has a very non-Asian sounding name, I feel you on many levels. Robin, how about you? What changes have you seen in comics for kids?
I would like to second what Jonathan says. I think there has definitely been a lot more different voices coming in, and I think we're like in that like growing pain stage. Like we have gotten through certain blocks, but now people are expecting Asian Americans authors to tell certain type of Asian American story, like like I can go on and talk about Korean culture and growing up Asian American, but also I want to talk about other things too. And like being an Asian American author shouldn't be a limitation. It could be like a bonus, but not a limitation, So hopefully that will happen, in the next like maybe 10 years or so. And I think that would happen as more and more different diverse background authors are coming in, talk about all kinds of stories, with their perspective, individual perspective. And I think like when I grew up in Korea, I read whole lots of different comics that are all for kids, but that's definitely not kids books, in American standard. But so when I moved here, it was like really eye-opening and also kind of like shocked that there are such a limited concept of comics compared to like what Asians think of comics. So I was looking for like something equivalent to manga in American publishing, and it just didn't exist, So I think that's why when manga came in, like it blew up because everybody was looking for that and kind of fill that niche. I have no idea still why Minx failed because like I think the concept was really good, and I just don't know why it didn't happen. But I think that's all I guess like the DC comic had an idea of what like kids who read manga likes to read. They were just predicting it instead of actually like looking into what they're reading. They're just kind of thinking about it in like a business sense, I guess. I don't know where I was going with that, but anyhow, I think because of manga and because of all these different diverse authors are coming in and having the chance to tell their own story, I think there's gonna be, I can only see this going like more forward and more positive in the future.
Yeah, I hope so. I have to say, as a librarian and also an auntie, I'm very, very happy at the great variety of titles that I'm able to recommend to kids and teens, and also send along to all of the little ones that I'm auntie to. And I'm super excited about even more, hopefully, in the future. So Jerry, what is your experience been, and what changes have you seen?
So I've actually done this a lot longer than people think. So one of my first jobs was working with a woman named Barbara Slate, and Marvel actually had a girls line. So my first job was doing the backgrounds on a comic that she wrote and illustrated called Sweet 16, which is kind of a Archie set in ancient Rome. And then I worked on with her things like New Kids on the Block, also doing backgrounds and things like that, and a couple of graphic novels. But there was never anyone that looked like me, or my friends. So as far as the African American characters, it's still relegated to kind of sidekick characters in Marvel Comics. And so that was just kind of it for years and years and years. I created a comic strip called Mama's Boys, and I self-published my first Mama's Boys book in 1997, and then second one in 2007, third one in 2011, and because there just wasn't a lot like that, and then Raina Telgemeier came along and just kind of made middle grade graphic novels a thing that just everyone was looking for. Since her, there have been some. I think the diversity in the stories was really well done. So you could see like a Roller Girl, or an El Defo, and Hey Kiddo, Stitches. So there were different kinds of stories. There still weren't a lot of kids of color, specifically African American characters. And I know that even with New Kid, I can't tell you how many times that got rejected by various publishing houses, where I would just come that close and then like Chutes and Ladders, step on a chute and go right back down to the beginning, and then bring it back up and get really close and then right back down to the beginning. So I think it's been really important that it has, gotten some notoriety. So hopefully it makes it easier for the Derricks of the world who say that they're new to the game, that they can come along and just be embraced more quickly, so that it's not like that Black comics are just for Black kids and Black kids don't read, so therefore we don't need Black comics, and that was always kind of catch-22 that I was in. So we'll see. I think so, and I hope so. But again, we'll see.
Thanks, Jerry. Faith, I know you talked a little bit about that earlier. Was there anything else you wanted to add to the changes that you've seen or that you hope to see?
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like Jonathan and I were probably about the same age, and we started making comics about the same time. But like I started in like the mid-late aughts, 2007. That was when my first book was published. And even though I'm cisgender and white, because I was a woman, I was a diversity hire, like way back then, So like that was, I would go to conventions and it would be like me and 5 guys on a panel. And things like that. And now it's very different. It feels like night and day. Like, and of course we have miles to go in terms of getting like more voices into this industry, but it's so different now, and Jerry mentioned Raina, and having Smile be like the massive success that it was, and kind of like breaking open the industry, and especially showing that there was a very, very hungry audience out there that was primarily young girls, especially. Like, I feel like that was really important. I mean, I think the reality is if you have a big book that does really, really well for a publisher, other publishers are going to want to repeat that success. I mean, that's how it works. So like, that's really exciting. And as well as the success of books like New Kids or other books that have different perspectives, different points of view. At the end of the day, it's like, that's what publishers want. They want to publish books that people want to read. So yeah, it feels so different now. It really does. Again, miles to go, but it's exciting. And I'm super glad I'm not a diversity hire anymore.
Thank you. So we got the 10-minute warning. So just a heads up as to closing out this awesome session. But I wanted to ask you all, how can librarians, educators, parents, readers be better allies to authors and creators, and also readers in general, but also specifically in relation to graphic novels and comics for kids? And I want to leave it open, go crazy, like as to who wants to answer. Or is that a mistake?
I'll start. I think by not pigeonholing the books, I would love for a librarian to see, you know, a white boy from Minnesota and give him Robin's book to read, you know, so that that's how you learn, and that's how you get empathy, you know, that boys can read books for girls, you know, African Americans can read white books, they can read our books, you know, that kind of thing. So it's not just these books created by these people are only for this audience, you know. And I think with the LGBT community, and just so many different things that librarians can just say, hey, this is a great book, we should all read it, you know, and not really have the limitations. So I think that would be a huge step.
I mean, I feel like librarians are already doing it, at least from
Yeah.
my perspective. You know, I feel so embraced by libraries and librarians, you know, like every time I do a library event, it's like the librarians are there to support comics. They're like, I look at the career that I've had, and 14 graphics novels published, and with one exception, it's like they haven't been best-selling books, but they've been supported by librarians. And that has been the support that's allowed me to continue to do books full time. So I'm incredibly grateful for that support. I don't know. I don't know what better they could do, because like, I just feel like they're doing so much good already.
Now, I should have said that is the major thing, not that they haven't been doing it, but that what has helped. Because I mean, I wouldn't be here on this panel now had they not done that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it was like a big part of changing the industry. It's like getting the respect of librarians and getting graphic novels into libraries. Like when I grew up, like there wasn't, you know, the graphic novel section. There was the 741 section, which would have like collections of like Garfield and, you know, For Better For Worse. And like, I love that section because I love newspaper comics, but to have like separate sections, you know, in the young adult section, in the children's section, in the adult sections, like specifically for comics, like that is fairly new. And just like having that has been like such a boon for the comic industry, I feel, and cartoonists.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I had that kind of a moment too, just like in recent years coming into the library, and just obviously back when we could go outside, you know, like coming into the library and seeing that there's a whole like graphic novel section now, and not just, you know, having to search for the art books in like an art section full of all different types of like how-to books and stuff too. But really having like a dedicated section, I think was like a really big move and a big step. And I really wish that existed when I was a child, and how cool that would have been. But yeah, I think maybe like the others have said, that there's just been a larger, I don't know, I feel like librarians put in the effort, like more than like anybody else almost, and that they do deserve more credit. And I think just like having a genuine interest in people, and stories and storytellers, and also children, like getting to know children and what they actually are interested in and actually like speaking to them like they're people, you know, and then taking that into, you know, how you approach, I guess, us as the creators of all this content, and trying to like figure out where those two meet, and like how you can best like encourage children to like, that the ones that want to do this type of work to get into it and find the information that they need and may not have, to get into it, and then to also just encourage more reading and learning about the differences that we all have and what makes them great and what like makes the world go round, basically. I think it's, I think it's great.
Yeah, and I think like the graphic novel section in different branches of the library really shows like the personal input of the librarians who work there, like more so than like any other shelves in the library. So I think it is very important that librarians read voraciously of all kinds of graphic novel and choose with their own conviction that this is a great book I can recommend, and that's a lot of reading. There's like a lot of comic books out there, a lot more than you can ever imagine. But I think that's probably the most important thing that like the librarians can do, is to read a lot of comics, all kinds of comics, not just kids comics, but like adult comics, like European comics, manga, everything, and then choose from their own, own taste and like recommend it to everyone, not just kids, even to adults.
And I guess I'll just echo, I mean, a lot of folks have talked about just, librarians do a great job about that, but I think it's important also to stress maybe to have parents make sure that they're sort of like engaging in diversifying the readers. So like if they're just reading, like maybe comics is a bridge. I mean, that's the thing is, when I was in school, it kind of ties in the earlier question, like maybe tattoo artists were the only artists less respected than like cartoonists, right? And then people would joke that like, oh, kids that can't read comics. But now like comics have become almost this like last bastion of literature with when you're competing with screen time and video games. And I don't mean to disparage those things because I love those things, but like, comics and graphic novels, those are the things that are getting kids to read. And it's really amazing. And I think that so just keep encouraging that. I know that there's always talks about like, are comics real reading? But like, if kids are reading, who cares? Like, again, it's creating empathy. It's letting people see a different perspective, but also like try to get the parents involved too. I think, something we try to do in our house, we don't have kids, but like, we try to look at what we're reading and making sure that like, again, I'm not just reading like all kids books or all just like old white guys, but just like trying to find stories that are from different perspectives, so that I think that just informs me as a creator and it informs me as a human being. And again, it just ultimately the goal is that it makes me more empathetic towards the other people that I'm sharing this world with.
I will say I've seen so many tweets in the past couple months from adults saying, I just read my first graphic novel and I really like it. Like I see what all the fuss is about and I'm not going to confiscate them when I see my kid read them anymore because they are real reading. So I think the battle is slowly being won and we've gotten a lot of converts.
Very slowly though.
Yes.
I still roll my eyes every time I see a panel. It's like, comics, they're not just for kids.
Right.
Like, I'm just like, oh my God, like, are we still happy to have this conversation? But I agree. It's just kind of like, I think we've all said is even with the sort of the diversity is like, I think Robin saying it was a growing pains is a real, like, I think that's such an accurate way to capture it because it is. And so it'll be so interesting to see. Just imagine, the kids that are reading now, and then they're going to grow up and they're going to be cartoonists and they're not going to have, they won't have lived in a world where they had to go to the comic book store and look at those superhero books because they wouldn't know that world. They would, they might not know a world where it's like, oh, there's like 3 comics from Black creators and 3 comics from Asian American creators. Like they're, like, I'm honestly, I'm like so jealous of that world that we get to live in now and that they're going to create.
No, it's been an amazing last full year, like 365 days when you see what Hey Kiddo did. Mm-hmm. And then, Guts was literally the best-selling book in the United States when it came out, which is just like mind-boggling,
It's exciting. It's really fun to see.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like, I don't know. How can you not be excited by it? I feel like we're part of this industry that's really changing, and I don't know, it has a future that is bright, and I don't know, that's exciting, just exciting.
And I think it's very important to get them when they're young. Like kids who grew up reading comics is different from adults who just get into, reading comics. Like I still remember the first comics I read when I was a little girl, and that's still like one of my favorite books ever, and I think that really shaped me, like my reading pattern from the rest of my life.
Same. I'm someone who grew up reading comic strips. I was really excited the first time I got to try lasagna because of Garfield. I used to cut out comic strips and paste them up on my closet door, like my favorite Far Side and whatever. So once again, I just want to thank you all, Jonathan, Jerry, Faith, Robin, Derrick, for all of the awesome work that you all do. Thank you for all of your wonderful stories, and I know it's not easy to draw so much, and also to come up with all of these like I said, wonderful stories, and also the art that accompanies it. And thank you for being part of this conversation today. And also thank you to the wonderful Ryan Mita from the Children's Book Council Graphic Novel Committee, who helped organized this panel for San Diego Comic-Con at home. I hope that we're all able to gather one day together in real life, hopefully at my library behind me too, or wherever you all want to meet up. I think that is it. And I'm going to just give everybody a round of virtual but real applause for being part of this today. So I